The Menendez brothers, Lyle and Eric, have just been resentenced for the murder of their parents in 1989. Children committing murder is not new, but their sentencing raises questions. Now, my guest today is Dr. Christiaan Bezuidenhout. He's a professor of criminology at the University of Pretoria, where he teaches psychocriminology, criminal justice, and contemporary criminology. And he's the editor of this book, The Child and Youth Misbehaviour in South Africa. Christiaan, we've come a very far way since the causes of crime were attributed to supernatural forces possessing an individual, and reform and punishment consisted of exorcism and drowning and burning people at a stake and burying them alive or drilling a hole in their cranium, luckily to release evil spirits. So has there been a paradigm shift in the theories on youth misbehavior?
Mickey, thank you for the opportunity. Yes, I think there's been a huge shift in criminology, and we in criminology have really been blessed with criminology theories explaining crime. So I think the main focus is on explaining crime, and what you've just mentioned, in the ancient times, drilling a hole in the cranium or in the skull to release evil spirits. I mean, there's so many movements in the world globally in terms of the rights of the child. So, and I think the focus on the rights of the child and even females, with GBV, violence against women and children per se, there's been a huge momentum shift on what about the voice of the children? Do we understand children? In the past, they never focused on the child, and the child never had a voice to explain what they feel and think. And I think if you look at the psychological part of explaining the behavior, I think the momentum shift came there to have a more clear, holistic understanding of the child and their behavior. Because often we see, like you've mentioned, the Menendez brothers, there's so many others, where children can even murder a whole family, take out the whole family, the bullying issues, at school, being involved in gangsterism, drugs. And because there's so many aspects to youth, and we use the word youth misbehavior because there's sort of a label in terms of delinquency, stating that all children are delinquent when they, do something wrong or some incorrigible behavior. So we decided to use the word misbehavior, and our government is also supporting the whole thing about misbehavior. So in criminology, as I've said, we've got so many theories focusing on all aspects. And when I say all aspects, we look at the social environment, the biological part, the genetics, in other words, the psychological part, psychology, a very strong focus as well in part of the holistic approach. And then obviously we look at learned behavior. We look at environment, the social environment where the child grows up. So that's why I say, and criminology is the only science that actually focuses on youth misbehavior or crime in its relativity. So we focus on all aspects to try and explain why they behave the way they do.
There's a theory by Gottfriedson and Hirschi that all crime can be explained by people's pursuit of self-interest.
Yeah.
And more we find children, and especially adolescents who kill others, sometimes just doing it, and you ask them why, and they say, I just wanted to feel what it feels like. And I'm thinking about the historical case of 11-year-old Mary Bell, and in 1986 she killed 2 small boys in Newcastle in England. And I just find that they just say, I just wanted to know what it feels like.
Yeah, I mean, we get children that commit cruel, sadistic crimes, and then you get children that steal a lollipop from a shop. The diversity of misbehavior is so broad. And one would ask the question, why would you kill your parents? Why would you kill William McCormick? William McCormick in England in 2014 killed his teacher with a knife. He stabbed her in the back. And he pre-planned it. He was premeditated.
Remember Morné Harmse as
yes,
well? The decapitated
the samurai sword killer in South Africa. Yes, absolutely. That's why I say, many people say, what's wrong? Is there genetically a disposition? Is it the environment where they grow up? And in criminology, fortunately, we look at all aspects because we cannot just say it's because of a genetic bundle. That's why, he's the runt of the litter. That's why they do it. There's so many reasons and so many explanations, and that's what we try and focus on. If you look at McCormick killing his teacher, Bell, the little girl that suffocated 2 girls, Morné Harmse, the so-called samurai killer, each case has got unique circumstances. But one thing that stands out, and you can also look at the research of Catherine Hyder in America, which is the leading researcher in terms of children who kill family members or a family or someone else. So we're talking about aggressive behavior. And one thing that stands out, many of these children, if you look at the environment, something played a role. There's a triggering factor, and then something escalates, Or like you've mentioned earlier, they just do it for fun. Yes, sometimes there's fantasy involved. Sometimes they think about things, they rudimentary thoughts, and then they ruminate about it. They think over and over and say, why don't I try it? And then the opportunity suddenly appears and they do it. And they say, but I don't know why I did it. So that's one aspect. The other aspect is, unfortunately, some children are born genetically with a predisposition. Now, if they're in an environment that triggers this predisposition, unfortunately, you're going to have a cruel, sadistic person. And they are at a very young age, they show this behavior. They're incorrigible. Sometimes they clash with authority. There's certain things that you can pick up. Other children being an abusive situation where the family, like a father, abusive mother, things that they say to the child, they belittle them. The father beats up the child, they lock the child up. There's certain things where that sort of grow into a sort of a hate and a hatred towards someone. And then the triggering factor exist, and then they do certain things. And you've mentioned now self-interest. When we talk about self-interest in a psychological sense, it's very important to remember that many people, we are born that way, self-interest. The very unfortunate thing about human characteristic is that what's in it for me? And you sort of, you don't know this when you're born, but you figure it out as you go along, and as your identity.
Resources, isn't it? Sometimes resources are scared, and resources can be attention or anything.
Absolutely. Consider children growing up in a squatter camp or an informal settlement in South Africa. It's rife. It's a big problem. Up to 60% people are living below the breadline in South Africa. Now, if you take that into context, when it comes to self-interest, like resources that you've mentioned, they don't have it. In South Africa, we've got a thing, I refer to it in the book, the liquor game, where the children in your squatter camps will shoplift, or they'll force their grandmothers, the magogo, or the parents to buy very expensive stuff. And then on a Friday night, they burn it. They dance around it and they burn it, like Italian shoes, Rolex watches. They'll shoplift these things, like a bucket of Kentucky Fried Chicken. They'll burn it and they'll dance around it and jump on it as if there's no respect. But that's actually ambivalence, where they react towards what they do want. And it's a thing.
Reaction formation.
Formation, exactly. Yes. So they actually try and destroy what they really want, a lifestyle, as you said, opportunities, and they don't have these things. And then when it comes to self-interest, I think a very important thing you've mentioned, Gottfredson and Hershey, Travis Hershey had a theory, independent theory, where he focused on attachment, bonding. Yes. With the family, and they involved with the family, they involved with the school, they involved with the church if they belong to a religious denomination. And all these links help the child to develop certain important buffers. Now, there's another theorist, Walter B. Reckless, that developed a theory on internal and external containment. In other words, what helps you with your life, whatever happens, what gives you resilience, what helps you to make decisions not to get involved. Now, the typical child that's involved, what Hershey is saying, involved in school, involved in the church, involved in camps, with youth camps, they're involved in the band, they're involved in school, sports. There's too many activities that are actually lying around, and there's time and leisure time to get involved in criminal activity. So you start to bond with the system, and you accept the system, and you sort of align yourself, and yourself efficiency and containment comes from, okay, I've got a good self-esteem, I've got identity that develops, I'm attached to the school. And the whole thing about, many people say, what would the school say? What will my teacher say? What will my grandmother say? The peer pressure and reviews as well. In your mind, you replay these things and you ask yourself the question. So what I'm saying is, you're building an ego, a strong ego. You're building internal buffers, internal containment, saying, I'm not going to get involved because I've got too much to lose. The typical child growing up the parents are absent. Think of single parent families. Think of children in South Africa and globally that grow up in informal settlements or in slum areas. The parents are often absent. How do they develop that containment? You can't blame them if they get involved in certain things. I'm not talking only genetically now. I'm talking the influence of both nature versus nurture. And there's a very intricate balance. And if you trigger your environment, trigger that part of you biologically, that is the end result, the misbehavior. So if you don't have that self-efficacy, self-containment, the identity, and a very important thing, the moral compass,
Yes.
to say what's right, what's wrong,
Yes.
how can you blame the child if the system failed the child?
Yes, I agree. And the moral compass, as we both know, in the beginning, your levels of conscience. In the beginning, you have a child's conscience because you don't do something wrong because you're scared you're going to get into trouble.
Yes.
And then your adolescent conscience, now that can be, even if you're 30 years old, it doesn't matter.
Yeah.
That is, what are other people going to think of me?
Yes.
And then your adult conscience is, I don't do wrong because it's wrong.
Yeah.
And it was always interesting for me when I interrogated people, that committed crimes, theft or etc. Is where is their level of conscience? On what?
Yeah.
And mostly it's what other people are going to think about me. It's not that some of them, the higher ones, I don't do it because it's wrong. They don't really commit the crimes.
It's, I think, an important question, and I think for your viewers and listeners, ask yourself the following question. If you get the opportunity to buy a flat screen television for $10 or let's say 100 Rand, you're not going to ask where it came from. Many people won't do that. Some will say, where did it come from? But if you have the opportunity to have this 70-inch or 75-inch television for 100 Rand or $10 or whatever the case may be, you'll get my interest as a human being. And that's where the moral compass come in. Yeah. When you stand in front of a mirror and say, do I have to look over my shoulder? Have I been 100% honest? Did I take a sweet from the shop, or did I have the opportunity to do A, B, C, D? And I think that's where the moral compass, that's where you realize, yes, I've got a compass. I won't do it. And then, that one song that Pink Floyd, in the song, they say, everybody's got their price, Bob.
Yes.
And I think you must ask yourself, at what tipping level will you go to not to tip over?
Somebody once asked me as well, he said, what's your price, Mickey? What do you want? And I just looked and I said, speak to me in islands. Buy me a few islands in plural.
Yeah.
I mean, maybe it's not this.
I think we've both been in those positions. And I think once you've got your moral compass sort of set on the true north of your life, I think you get to a position where you say, that's not worth it. I'm not at that level of thinking. So it takes a very long time, and I think Erickson spoke about your development tasks or phases that you have to go through. And if you don't go through those phases properly, typically with youth and young children, they sort of jump phases or they never finish a phase. So you are left with something, a problem, an issue, a challenge. And I think those are things that's very important in terms of getting there to the point where you say, sorry, there's no price that can change my moral compass.
The childhood development brings me to my next question, because agency refers to a person taking responsibility for the decisions of their lives.
Yeah.
Now, given the children's developmental phases, at what age legally can we accept agency in a child? And what is the United Nations requirement and their argument behind this?
Look, I'm going to talk from my perspective in South Africa. We used to have the law that say 0 to 7 years, no responsibility. Child, there's irrefutable, rebuttable. There's no way you can charge a child. So things have changed. So that age changed to 10 years. But then the United Nations came out and said, and a global thing for all the member countries, and they had very strong arguments and they pushed the countries. And we have followed suit now. So we used to have an age of 10 years, rebuttable, you can't get someone responsible. So we've moved that age, we've upped it. So the United Nations Committee on the Rights of the Child has pushed this issue, and now South Africa has heeded, and we've changed our age to 12 years. So that means that a police official cannot arrest a child, and we can't process them in the system, in the court system, That's it, 12 years. And that was sort of the age that the United Nations put forward that say any person up towards the age of 12 years, you can't process them in a legal system. So I just mentioned 0 to 7, then 7 to 14. So in South Africa, we're quite lenient towards children. I must be honest, there's a big push towards diversion and not getting children in the system and into a social work situation or program and help the child. But when you reach the age of about 14, the court says, wait a minute, it's not 12 anymore. You're now at 14. So 14, the state have to prove the child's liability. Before that, I can tell you that the court is very lenient up to about 14 years.
Well, if we say 10, I mean, Mary Bell was 11.
Yeah, 11, yeah.
When
you can't believe it that a young child of that age can actually throttle and struggle. I think there's certain, like in South Africa, we've got the white paper on correctional services. And to show you the leniency in South Africa, a person up to the age of 25 is still deemed in development, and a young adult, if you take it, adult is 18 years in South Africa, but 18 to 25, we're still very lenient in terms of sentencing. If you can recall the AWB leader, the murder on Eugene Terblanche on his farm, there was an adult involved and there was a young person involved. The adult was charged with murder and housebreaking. The young person was only charged with housebreaking, not being part of the murder. So that just shows you, so you can pose the question, why? Is it because of the age? And I can sort of categorically state that our system is very lenient towards children to rather divert, give them the next opportunity, because they're still young and they're still developing. And I think that the push from the United Nations makes sense, because many young children globally are growing up in circumstances where they do not develop these identities, the self-efficacy, the self-esteem, the identity, and then the moral compass that we've mentioned. And I think that's the main reason, I think, where they pushed for that. When you talk about advocacy and you can take responsibility of your life, I still question the South Africans' move to change the age of 18 as an adult from 21. We're lenient on the one side, but we also changed the legislation to say, okay, you're an adult when you're 18. I personally don't believe many people are already in a position at the age of 18 to make solid decisions in life in terms of my future and not coming back,
I agree with you. I think that was maybe done because then they can vote to get more.
Perhaps I don't know, but that's something that I sort of wonder about, I question it.
So globally, the world is awakening to influences on social media.
Yeah.
This is spurring the adolescents and the younger children to express hate and commit crimes such as threats, criminal injuria, cyberbullying, sexual harassment, and even murder. And even those sites encouraging self-harm and suicide are criminal. So why are young people so susceptible to these influences?
I personally think all the social media platforms that's available, it's got a huge influence, and I think you're saying susceptible in terms of the trends that's being pushed forward. I think, globally, it's unfortunate, but certain things, and I refer, the nice word for it is obsolescence, and it's referred to as user obsolescence. Now, user obsolescence imply that the system, the people, the capitalist system is pushing obsolescence. In other words, you must have the nicest new glasses. You must have the newest pen or phone or watch. And it's a thing it's a trend. You must have it. And eventually we get indoctrinated. It's a moral and a thinking process that's established. And I think that influences our children a lot. These little things about the thumb, I didn't only learned it recently from young people that the thumb can be a swear word. In my day, the thumb meant, hey, it's okay. It's
from
okay.
The Roman times.
Yeah, exactly. So now, if you do this, maybe in Australia, it's a swear word. So you must be very careful, and that trend influences people because in the old days, children played outside. They hurt themselves. They learn a lot. Now they spend many hours indoors with social media. Anyone can reach you at any time of the day, 24/7. In the past, you had the landline. If it didn't work,
I remember that.
We'll wait till tomorrow. We'll wait till tomorrow next week, then we'll tell them. or we'll hear something from the school or the church the next day or on the weekend or whatever the case may be. So I believe that globally the trend has been set, and it's part of peer pressure. You must be in, you must have this. As I always say, is what we drive, where we live, and what I earn. Sort of the middle
Yes.
class push, where we had the middle class measuring rod of how your house looked like and the money that you earn, the clothes that you wear. I think it's now much more about the social media, the equipment you have, the access that you have. Do you have Spotify? Do you have YouTube? Are you on this ABC? Are you on X? Are you TikToking? Oh no, you're old. You know you
Facebook
must.
is old.
Facebook is old. It's so the newest trends pushes, I think, the young generation, and I believe we have not really measured the consequences yet, and I don't think we've really established the consequences. What I do want to say is I don't want to sound like I'm from the past generation, which I am, but I think it will catch us in the future. I think it's going to catch up with us. And I think what's happening now, and if you consider a thing like the COVID-19, in South Africa, children were locked up for 6 months in the house.
Yes.
And, the only mechanism, medium to communicate with their peers and others with the social media that they have. In other words, a mobile phone or which other gadget they have. So I think the trend is gadgets, technology, what I'm doing, but I don't think we're really focusing on the aftermath of what's coming. AI and taking over thinking processes for children, problem solving. That's what I'm talking about. And those are things that's going to be a challenge for our young generation. My opinion, that's why I say I don't want to say I'm from the past, but what I'm thinking is we have to find the middle way to live with this, but also still keep our old traditional way of raising and socializing, because you can't get rid of it. There's certain key elements in socialization that develops identity. A social media cannot develop identity per se, but can give you a pseudo identity, a pseudo thinking thought process.
Avatar.
Absolutely. And and those are the things that worries me. So we have to get the middle way, with this. What I want to mention from what worries me about the future is that eventually children will just rely on these mechanisms and not have the ability with proper problem solving, internal, my own issues.
Yes.
Because I'll look on social media quickly. Those are the 10 most important things.
What does ChatGPT tell me about?
To change my identity, to change my look, so it's an artificial way. It's not a human way of, understanding human behavior. And one thing that I want to maybe say is that human behavior is so complex. People act differently. You can't say a person will go on one path of behavior, and that's life path development.
Yes.
And I think that's to answer you, the long and short of it, life path development is influenced by these trends. And I don't think we know exactly what it would eventually give us as an end product.
Yes.
I think, developing agency, developing self-identity, self-esteem, resilience, those are human trends, human nature. Electronics cannot develop those things. It can influence it, and that's the problem.
Bill Gates have now recently also said that children under the age of 16 should not have social media or should not.
I agree with him, to be honest, but I would sound like a authoritarian person, and what's wrong with you? But
exactly, and it shouldn't be in schools. And to me, it's obvious that you shouldn't have mobile phones in schools. Put it away while you're learning so you can focus. But children will resent this and will resist and push
Can
back.
You imagine? Can you imagine? I just want to go back to my argument about opulence. And first of all, I agree with Bill Gates. If the person, let's say in the past, the market leader of development in terms of IT and all the programs and Word and Google and things like that's been developed. If one of the leading persons that tell you that, listen, we've sort of made a mistake. It's not.
Should listen.
We should listen. I think we should listen. But let's go back to opulence quickly. So you've got like design opulence. Now that means that your major companies will redesign their phone, the face, and they'll market it to the younger generation. So you must have this. They also have, you know, when it comes to design obsolescence, it's also in terms of lifespan obsolescence. In other words, they design these phones or they change the software. So for 2 years or 3 years, it's workable, but then, oh no, sorry, it's not compatible with this software program. Why? Because they want you to buy a new one.
Your smartphone is not that smart anymore.
It's not that smart anymore. So what I'm saying with that is, I think we neglect the fact that there's also a very strong capitalistic influence in terms of selling product to young people. And you know, your global market of tech is your young and middle age group. And that's what they focus on. And I think, you know, there's nothing sort of monitoring this monster. I call it the obsolescence monster.
Yes.
There's nobody monitoring it.
Yes.
If you can, you know, maybe the you know, your crowd that's focusing on issues like this can Google Akbok Bloshi in Ghana, where the biggest e-waste dump is situated, and they'll see what I mean by the obsolescence. You know, there's mountains of obsolete equipment that's just being dumped. There's people, there's actually cities in Akbok, they live in these areas. And, you know, it is something that we haven't thought about, the e-waste, the impact of e-waste on the youth. You know, we talk about breathable air, water, pollution, all kinds of pollution. And that's what I'm saying. This monster is much bigger than just new phones. What happens to all these things? Because you can't recycle them.
And the energy that they're using.
Absolutely.
That's
And where do they get the resources to build these things? Because copper, you know, and your metals are running out. So what do? They're going to the deep sea. They're doing drilling in the deep sea to get those metals and things and so on. So, you know, there's such a big issue in terms of this monster that I don't think we realize the impact. We'll only find it out in the future. And maybe that might be too late.
Dr. Christiaan, I'd like to thank our YouTube watchers for watching our video so far. And I'd like to invite you, if you want to join our Patreon account, because we're continuing with the interview on the Patreon account.